And just like that, week 4 of the fantasy season is here, so you know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go through every single matchup, go over every single wide receiver, and go over who you should be starting and who you should be sitting in week 4 of the fantasy season. All right, let's start the video off with Thursday Night Football. We'll have the Seahawks traveling to face the Cardinals. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a locked and loaded must-start player at the wide receiver position every single week. No reason whatsoever he should not be in your starting lineup. Good matchup against the Cardinals here. It is a short week. You never know what's going to happen in these Thursday night games, but 18.3 or more fantasy points in every single game for Jackson Smith-Njigba thus far on the season. Now, his volume, his snap share was a little bit lower in week 3, but he just wasn't really necessary in a blowout game, and he still had 96 receiving yards and a touchdown. So you got to feel good if you own JSN. But like I said, this is a really good matchup as the Cardinals have struggled pretty mightily against the wide receiver position, and their cornerback room is pretty banged up. So you could risk it for the biscuit if you're absolutely desperate with a guy like Cooper Kupp or Torrey Horton. Cooper Kupp, a down week in week 3, once again, wasn't really necessary after having a good week 2. And then obviously we're seeing kind of the emergence, so to speak, of rookie Torrey Horton, who has a touchdown in each of the last 2 games, but 3 or less catches in each of the last 2 games. So I'd be a little bit, just cautious if you're going to plan on grabbing Horton off the waivers and starting him on a short week, but it is a good matchup. Very risky flexes in both Kupp and Horton, but I won't be surprised if either player has a decent week 4. And then we move to the Cardinals side of things. Marvin Harrison Jr., I mean, listen, I don't think the scheme is good for MH Jr. I don't know if the quarterback play is good. The play calling doesn't feel great. But also we have to start to admit that some of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s play in general just hasn't looked good. So he's bumped down to the flex area in this matchup against the Seahawks. I mean, this is a tough matchup. The Seattle Seahawks have given up the second fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. It's a Thursday night matchup. He can't be anything more than a flex for me. And I mean, maybe a risky flex at that. But yeah, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, there's nobody else here. I mean, this offense, the play calling is not good for fantasy. Now they lose James Conner. We'll see how they fare with Trey Benson at running back. I mean, I just don't know what to make of this offense right now. You can't feel super encouraged if you own Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I don't think the season's over for MH, but we'll see how he fares at home on a short week against a good Seattle Seahawks secondary. I know this one hurts, but I'm going to stick with the trend here. I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s total receiving yards here in week 4 of the season, currently sitting at 48.5 receiving yards. He has only hit this mark once on the entirety of the season, and I just don't love this short week and this matchup against the Seahawks for MH. So I'm heading straight to Underdog to take the under on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s total receiving yards. Don't forget, guys, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick'em for week 4. Take that free Pick'em, take the under on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s total receiving yards, and if both of those lines hit, you're going to automatically double your cash entry. Plus, Underdog has a brand new exclusive offer to all users who sign up using promo code THECATCH. Once you play through $5 on Underdog, you're going to automatically receive $50 in bonus cash. And on top of that, Underdog's also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. So make sure you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH if you want to take advantage of all of their week 4 exclusive NFL offers. Moving along, we'll have an early game on Sunday. Our first international game of the season is going to be the Vikings and the Steelers. Let's start with the Vikings side of things. And at the time of recording this, don't know if Carson Wentz is going to be the starting quarterback or J.J. McCarthy, but I'm going to assume it'll probably be Carson Wentz. I guess we'll find out. But, I left Justin Jefferson as a start last week. It doesn't really matter to me who the quarterback is. If you own Justin Jefferson, I think you got to start him each and every single week. Steelers kind of middle of the pack against opposing wide receivers. So good enough spot for JJ here, and you just got to roll with him if you own him. But don't forget, this is going to be our first week back with Jordan Addison coming back from his suspension, and I'm good with Jordan Addison in the flex because I'm a Jordan Addison fan. And I feel like he's just going to be a solid flex option. Now, it depends on who you own. His very first game back from suspension, maybe you want to pump the brakes. I'm not expecting anything crazy here, but I think he can be a flex option for you guys in week 4. And really, nobody else has stepped up in his absence, whether it's Adam Thielen or Jalen Naylor or even, rookie Ty Felton. Nobody has really shown up here. We did get a decent game out of Hawkinson at the tight end position this past week, so bear that in mind, I guess. But yeah, for the most part, JJ a start, Addison flexible. Then when we look at the Steelers side of things, this Vikings defensive unit, kind of the opposite of last year. They're worse against the run this year than they are against the pass. And right now, they're giving up the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. And DK Metcalf has a ceiling of 12.3 fantasy points this year. He has not scored more than that. He's had at least 11 fantasy points in every game this year. Like he's no more than a low end startable player, but I kind of just have him in the flex area this week because once again, like I won't be surprised if he gets you about 11 fantasy points. He doesn't have more than 4 catches in a game this year and only 3 catches in the last 2 games. And once again, it's a tough matchup against the Vikings, but you never know what's going to happen in these international games. They can get kind of wonky early. And then Calvin Austin, going to live in the flex area, but he's a risky flex. You look at the stats this year, 17 fantasy points, 3.2, 12.4. It's a tough matchup. If he doesn't find the end zone, don't love him. There's really nobody else to talk about here. I do think Calvin Austin is flexible, but he's risky at best. And Metcalf, I think another low ceiling game in line this week. JJ, you got to feel good. Addison, watch out for him. He could be a flex option here in week 4. All right, moving into Sunday's early afternoon games, we'll have the Commanders traveling to face the Falcons. Let's start with the Commanders side of things. Kind of interesting to look at here with Marcus Mariota being the starting quarterback in week 3 and Terry McLaurin sustaining an injury in week 3. What are we going to make of this wide receiver room in week 4? On top of that, Deebo Samuel not having, a good game necessarily in week 3. So I think Deebo, Terry McLaurin, as long as he plays, are kind of low-end starts this week. They're both, guys who deserve to be in your starting lineup, but the Falcons have given up the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I like Deebo a little bit more this week as long as Terry's on the field because I think A.J. Terrell will line up on Terry McLaurin. That should open things up for Deebo. We don't know if Jaden Daniels or Marcus Mariota is going to be the starting quarterback at the time of recording this in week 4. I think it's better if JD5 is the starting quarterback, but obviously Mariota played okay this past week, but that was at home against the Raiders. This is on the road against a pretty good Falcons defense. So low-end starts, both guys that can be in your starting lineup, but maybe tamper your expectations of a high-ceiling game based on the matchup and being on the road. Nobody else that we need to I guess I'll mention, his name's not on the screen, but some people are starting to look at Luke McCaffrey because he had 3 catches and a touchdown in week 3. Then we have the potential injury to Terry here. Just no thank you. I'm staying away. I'm not going to overreact to 1 touchdown last week. Then we look at the Falcons. The quarterback play has been pretty anemic out of Michael Penix, to say the least, over the last 2 weeks. No passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, has not thrown for more than 172 passing yards in each of the last 2 games. Drake London, a low-end start for me. The Commanders' secondary has played pretty poor this year, but they've played okay at times, but ultimately their ranking is pretty low going into week 4. So I think Drake London is perfectly fine, startable option, but he can't be more than a low-end start just based on the trajectory of the quarterback play right now in Atlanta. 10.5 points in week 3, 5.9 in week 2, 13.5 in week 1. Guy that can be in your lineup, but once again, tamper your expectations for a ceiling. Can keep an eye on Darnell Mooney. You got guys like, Ray McLeod, Cordero Hodge, hanging around here. Casey Washington, he's been banged up. Come on, there's nothing really here from a fantasy perspective as we approach the week. Mooney had 11 targets this past week, but he only caught 4 of those. So I don't know. I'm just staying away from anybody not named Drake London. So don't love the ceiling for the wide receivers in this game, but the wide receiver ones in this game are still, for the most part, startable. Next up, we'll have the Chargers traveling to face the Giants. Tale of 2 different stories when we look at these offenses. Let's start with the Chargers side of things, and let's start with Ladd McConkey because I feel like the Ladd McConkey panic is in full swing, and it's very understandable. And I think If this was just about any other matchup, I may have Lad bumped down to the flex area. Like, we do need to have a serious conversation about the fact that Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston's volume in the passing game is hurting Ladd McConkey. We just can't ignore it anymore. He's had 5 or more targets in each game on the season, but he has a ceiling of 13.4 fantasy points and 9.8 or less in the last 2 games. And something else worth mentioning here is that we saw a lot of involvement out of Omarion Hampton in the passing game this last week with 7 targets and 6 catches. So, I mean, bear all of that in mind. I'm not going to give up on Ladd McConkey as a strong start just yet on the road here in week 4 against the Giants, who've given up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers on the season. I think this could be the week where we see Ladd actually get the involvement, potential touchdown that we want to see. If it doesn't happen this week, then I will panic in full swing with you guys. Potentially, I still think Ladd will be a flex option at worst, low end wide receiver 2 at worst. But yeah, we do need to have the conversation. Like, his fantasy value is hurt. We can't deny it. And it sucks to see because the Chargers are throwing the football a ton. 47 passing attempts out of Herbert this past week. But keep Ladd as a solid start this week. He's facing the Giants defense. But for that same reason, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, start them. You got to start these guys. You can't call them flex options. Everybody is worth a start here in terms of these primary wide receivers for the Chargers. Keenan Allen, 3 games, 3 touchdowns. Quentin Johnston, 3 games, 14.9 or more fantasy points in each game and 3 total touchdowns as well. These guys got to be in your starting lineups. They are strong flexes, strong wide receiver 2s, whatever they got to be. You can keep rolling with them. They're all very solid in this line, or in this matchup, against one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Then we have the Giants side of things. Don't know what's going to happen here at quarterback. There's some talks that Russell Wilson may be benched. We'll find out. Is it going to be Jackson Dart? Is it going to be Jameis Winston? We'll find out. But right now, Jameis Winston's been on the roster as the emergency quarterback. So I think most signs point towards Jackson Dart, who has gotten some involvement in some, run packages. I don't really care who it is. I will still start Malik Neighbors. I know week 3 was worrisome. It looked like he almost got, hurt in this game. He had 7 targets, just 2 catches. But don't forget he had 37.7 fantasy points in week 2. Like, this is still Malik Neighbors. The Chargers secondary has certainly not been bad. Top 10 against opposing wide receivers. But I'm just not going to panic on Neighbors yet. I think the talent can outweigh the situation here. I'm not even going to bump him down. He is still just a start for me in week 4, and we'll see what happens with the quarterback position for the Giants. Next up, we have the Titans traveling to face the Texans, and we'll start with the Titans side of things. LAC-NYG, I think, is a risky flex this week. He is kind of the player I would take a chance on in terms of the Titans wide receivers because this quarterback play and the offense just feels anemic, and it is not benefiting Calvin Ridley whatsoever. I am bumping Calvin Ridley down to a sit. I mean, how much longer can we consider this guy a potential flex or wide receiver 2, whatever he is on your roster? He has, through the first 3 games of the season, just 8 catches off of 21 targets. I mean, it's just not clicking. He's almost being used as like a decoy wide receiver 1. We got to see it get going before we can consider him anything else. It's a good enough matchup against the Texans, but not really, actually. I'm sorry, because he's going to get Derek Stingley. It's a good enough matchup on paper in terms of the ranking, but not exactly for the wide receiver 1. Wide receiver 2s have been fine against this Texans defense, but wide receiver 1s have not. It's a bad spot for Ridley. He's a sit for me in week 4. But LAC-NYG does have 2 touchdowns in the last 2 games. And like I said, wide receiver 2s have played better against the Texans. He's a risky flex. He sits at 50% roster, but it has been nice to see the chemistry between LAC-NYG and Cam Ward kind of develop here. Risky flex, but could be a guy for you if you're desperate this week. Nico Collins, you just got to keep rolling with him. Not a great passing attack for the Texans. I think we all know that. The offensive line play has been bad, but the one guy who's going to get it done is Nico Collins. 22.4 fantasy points this past week, a touchdown, 8 catches. His best game yet in terms of everything: targets, receptions, receiving yards. I guess he had a touchdown in week 2, but still, overall, his best game on the season yet. And it's a good matchup against the Titans. This secondary has been really bad this year. So fire up Nico Collins with confidence, must-start player. Anybody else, keep your eyes on Christian Kirk. I still think Kirk can have a role. He did have 8 targets this past week. It's a good matchup. I think Kirk could surprise people this week, but not ready to put him in my starting lineup. Nobody else here. Higgins, Noel, Hutchinson. We don't need to consider any of these guys. Keep a close eye on Christian Kirk this game. The targets were encouraging this past week, but really the only true start in this matchup for me is going to be Nico Collins. Next up, we have the Eagles traveling to face the Buccaneers. And I don't want to say I told you guys but you just have to keep the faith in players like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They are players, even if you view them as wide receiver 2s or flexes, they deserve to be in your starting lineups on a weekly basis. And listen, it took a game script in which the Eagles were forced to throw the football, to move away from the lackluster, offensive coordinator plans that they had through the first 2 weeks of the season. It took a bad game script to get this team to throw the football, but thank God they threw the football in week 3. It benefited A.J. Brown, it benefited Devonta Smith, and it benefited Dallas Goedert. Didn't exactly benefit Saquon Barkley, but you got to feel good about seeing the actual involvement for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, who both scored touchdowns and both have 9 or more targets in this matchup, as well as 60-plus receiving yards, over 100 receiving yards for A.J. Brown, 60 receiving yards for Devonta Smith. So, listen, these guys are flex options, wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 1s, whatever they are in your starting lineup. I like them again in week 4 in a good competitive game script against a good Buccaneers team. Both these teams 3-0. Keep rolling with both of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. If you guys bought low on them, like I encourage you guys to do through the first 2 weeks of the season, you got to feel good. It may not happen every single week. There might be fluctuation here, but I'd like them both in a good enough matchup against the Bucs. And once again, what is a good game script? Both these guys are starts to me in week 4. Now, we look to the Buccaneers. We're going to have no Mike Evans as he is dealing with a hamstring issue, set to miss some time. Are we going to get Chris Godwin back this week? I don't know. Some reports are indicating that Godwin might be ready this week. This is really important, I think, for Emeka Egbuka, who I still think is a start no matter what, because he's going to see wide receiver 1 volume. But, we have to admit that he's facing an Eagles secondary that, listen, they've been a bit up and down to start this season, but it's still a tough spot for a rookie wide receiver to walk right into. I've been very supportive of Emeka Egbuka in your guys' starting lineups. I've been a Emeka Egbuka believer in all of that, but it's still a tough spot for a rookie wide receiver, even though I think he is that guy. It's a tough spot for him to walk into, even at home here. So I still think I'm going to leave him in the start category, but if Chris Godwin plays, I like Emeka Egbuka more because there's a little bit less defensive pressure there, right? But still, I think he's going to be a good start either way. Now, if Chris Godwin plays, if you're absolutely desperate, I think you could play him like as a low-end wide receiver 2 or flex. But ultimately, I want to try and sit him in his first game back. I'll just leave it at that. But obviously, I think there will be somewhat of a push for Godwin to play in week 4 if he can get ready, because Mike Evans not going to play in this matchup. So we'll see how this shakes out as the week goes on, but I think for the most part, Godwin probably going to be a sit for me for majority of you guys. Egbuka is still going to be a start, but Egbuka gets a little bit of a bump if Godwin's on the field at the same time. But I just don't want to risk it with Godwin quite yet unless you guys are absolutely desperate. Next up, we'll have the Panthers traveling to face the Patriots. Kind of an interesting matchup here. Let's start with the Panthers side of things. I think T-Mac, just a low-end start for me. You still got to feel good about T-Mac's overall usage. He wasn't really necessary in week 3, so I don't want to read too much into it. The Panthers were just blowing out the Falcons. He still had 8 targets. He's still leading this team in targets and everything. Xavier Legette didn't even play this past week. Hunter Renfrow, once again, wasn't necessary, but wasn't really anything in this game either. So T-Mac, you still got to feel good, but I just wonder, what is the true ceiling here? Panthers are on the road. It is a good spot. This Patriots defense is nothing, to be scared of. They've been pretty bad against opposing wide receivers. So T-Mac, solid start, but I'm not going to call him anything more than a low-end wide receiver 2 for you guys this week. Then when it comes to the Patriots wide receivers, first of all, the Panthers have been good against opposing wide receivers. They're giving up the 3rd fewest points to opposing wide receivers on the season, and What are we going to do here? Stephon Diggs, 5.3 fantasy points this past week. Kayshon Boutte, 4.8. Demario Douglas, like there's just nothing here. This is just never a good fantasy wide receiver room. And I'm just staying away from it in week 4. And I don't think any of you guys want to start any of these players anyways. And it's not even a good matchup. So maybe somebody here does something. I don't care. I'm staying away from these players. And this is a good matchup for the tight end position. And Hunter Henry's coming off of a big week. So maybe Henry is the guy again. I don't know. I'm not risking it with any Patriots wide receivers in week 4. All right, next up we will have the Saints traveling to face the Bills. Let's start with the Saints side of things. I still like Chris Olave as a solid kind of low-end start going into week 4 of the season. He's been solid through the first 2 weeks, at least 11.4 fantasy points in every game this year, ceiling of 15.7 fantasy points this past week. The Saints are going to be in position again where they're going to need to throw the football against this Bills team. I will assume that the Bills are going to be outplaying the Saints in this matchup, and Saints just consistently putting themselves in situations where they need to throw the football. That's good for Chris Olave. I like him this week. Rashid Shaheed just kind of lives in the flex area, maybe a risky flex. The Bills have improved against the wide receiver position, but they still gave up pretty good days this past week to Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So you can flex Shaheed if you want to, but he always holds some risk. Should probably be in that risky flex area, but I do like this matchup overall for fantasy. Should be a good one. And Khalil Shakir, I'll leave as a low-end start, maybe closer to the flex area, but did score a touchdown this past week off of 4 catches. Like the volume's not great here, but it's a good matchup against the Saints. So still like Shakir in this matchup. I still think Keon Coleman is flexible. Probably, once again, should have him in the risky flex, but I just like this matchup overall for fantasy, and especially like the Bills going up against the Saints here. So I think Shakir is the safer play, but Coleman does have some flex appeal. And basically the same thing goes for the Saints roster here. Olave, the much safer play, but Shaheed still has flex ability as we move into week 4. Except we'll have the Browns traveling to face the Lions. Let's start with the Browns side of things. I left both Judy and Tillman as just risky flex options here in week 4. Initially, I had them as sits. I mean, both these guys were absolutely awful this past week, and they've been very difficult to trust over the past 3 weeks, but 2 weeks especially. And I'll just leave it at this. The Lions secondary has not played great this year. I am recording this before Monday Night Football, but they have not ranked very high against opposing wide receivers. And this is going to be a game on the road where I think the Browns are going to be forced to throw the football, and they're going to be playing from behind. So they're still in the flex area, but they're very, very risky, and their ceiling can't feel high. But once again, matchup game script could benefit these guys if you truly have nothing better. Once again, recording this before Monday Night Football, so if anything crazy happens, any injuries, I'll have a pinned comment down below for the Lions wide receivers. But on a weekly basis, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a start for me, and Jamison Williams is as good of a flex option as you're going to get. Not a great matchup against the Browns defense, we know that, but still, Amon-Ra got to be in your starting lineup, and Jamison Williams always has high upside. Hasn't gotten a lot of volume through the first 2 games of the season. We'll see how Monday Night Football goes, but he still has flex appeal and upside on a weekly basis, and we'll just leave it at that. All right, next up we got the Jaguars traveling to face the 49ers to kick off the afternoon slate of games. And yeah, I mean, you guys tell me, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with this Jaguars wide receiver room? Everybody's a sit for me. I'm just done. The offense, the passing offense is just bad. People are dropping passes. Dewami Brown's hurt. Travis Hunter is playing defense. He's 2 targets this past week. Brian Thomas, 6 targets, 2 catches. I just can't do it. I can't do it with any of these guys. Parker Washington had 11 targets this past week, 4 catches. Just no thank you across the board. I'm done. I still think you can go buy low on Brian Thomas. I don't want to give up all hope, but until we see it happening on a consistent basis, just no thank you whatsoever. The Niners are a good secondary in terms of fantasy points allowed. I'm out this week on any Jaguars wide receiver. Then we look at Ricky Pearsall. I think Sticky Ricky's got to stay in your starting lineup. He did benefit from Jawan Jennings not playing this past week, but still, if you own Ricky Pearsall, really regardless of who the quarterback is, he's the true primary pass catcher for now. I guess maybe you could argue Christian McCaffrey is, but in terms of wide receivers, like there's no Kittle right now playing at tight end, so Pearsall still going to be a solid start for you guys. I will say the Jaguars defense has quietly been pretty good this year, but they have not been good against opposing wide receivers, so still a good spot for Ricky Pearsall. And don't know if Jawan Jennings is going to play this week. He was kind of surprisingly out this past week, but he still has flex appeal on a weekly basis. We saw that in week 2 when he had 19.9 fantasy points and a touchdown. So he's startable if he plays in the flex, but Ricky Pearsall really the only wide receiver that I really like in this matchup here in week 4. Except we'll have the Colts traveling to face the Rams. Danny Dimes keeping this Colts passing attack alive. And now we do look at this matchup against the Rams. Not bad. And I think Michael Pittman can stay as a start. I mean, I was kind of close to moving him down to the flex area, which is kind of where I've had him. But I think at this point, like the only game he hasn't performed well in was week 2 against the Broncos. And we expected him not to play great, getting the Pat Surtain treatment, right? And outside of that, he's had 19.3 or more fantasy points in each of the first 3 games and a touchdown in each of those games as well. So Pittman, start him, fire him up. Why not? Looking like a great draft day value. I think Josh Downs will just kind of live in the risky flex area. Don't exactly know what we're going to get out of him on a weekly basis, but if you're desperate, sure, I do expect the Colts to have to need to throw the football in this game. Alec Pierce, a little banged up in concussion protocol, may or may not miss this week, but there's really nothing there that we can trust between Alec Pierce or A.D. Mitchell. It's really just potential flex in Josh Downs, but Pittman, good start. All right, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, for now, until further notice, you just got to keep rolling with these guys every single week. We're getting the volume that we need out of the passing attack for the Rams, and both these guys are absolutely benefiting. Really, nobody else on this team is benefiting from the passing attack, but these are the only guys that you probably drafted in any of your league, so that is fine with us. Colts defense, nothing to sneeze at, but this is a home game for the Rams. And I mean, yeah, you got to fire Puka Nacua, 22.8 fantasy points this past week. Adams found the end zone, only 3 catches, but he did have 8 targets, 14.6 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns in 2 straight weeks. You got to feel good. If you own Nacua or Adams, they're both very solid starts here in week 4. Except we had the Bears traveling to face the Raiders. Let's start with the Bears side of things. Now, Rome Odunze was my must-start player of the week last week. And, he was perfectly fine, 15.2 fantasy points. I expected the Cowboys offense to push a little bit more to make that game more competitive. And if that had happened, I think Odunze could have had another monster week, but he still had a very good week, scored very early, just 3 catches off of 7 targets, but 62 receiving yards, a touchdown. 15.2 fantasy points. You are certainly not, upset if you own Rome Odunze. He has looked great. And this is a smash matchup. The Raiders have given up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. You got to feel good if you own Odunze. Keep rolling with them. I'll leave DJ Moore in the flex area. If the matchup wasn't so good, I think he would remain like a risky flex, but it was nice to see him get a touchdown this past week. And it's another really good matchup. So if you own DJ Moore, I think flex area is definitely doable. Then whoever you consider the next guy up, Alamide Zacchaeus did have some volume this past week, but I think more people are going to want to hear about Luther Burden, who I do think is worth rostering because it was nice to see some plays drawn up that involved him. Nice to see him score a touchdown. Did have over 100 receiving yards, but only 3 targets, 3 catches. Like, we don't want to get carried away, overreact to a really good matchup, but the matchup is good once again in week 4, so we'll have to kind of monitor him this week, but just way too risky to throw into your lineup. He's still a sit for me, but I do think we'll see his roster percentage increase. Then we look to the Raiders, kind of a down week for Jacoby Myers, just 9.3 fantasy points, 4 targets, 3 catches, 63 receiving yards in a game where the Raiders needed to throw the football against the Commanders. And, once again, this is a really good matchup for the Bears wide receivers, but vice versa. It's a really good matchup for the Raiders wide receivers as the Bears rank 1 spot below the Raiders in terms of fantasy points allowed. These are 2 bottom 5 units against opposing wide receivers. So I think Myers in the start category, had double digits in each of the first 2 games. Go ahead and feel good about starting him this week. Then I was close to putting Trey Tucker in the risky flex. That's probably where he is, but once again, the matchup is just so good. Monster week 3 for Trey Tucker, 40 fantasy points, 3 touchdowns, 145 receiving yards. And don't forget, he had a solid week 1 as well with a touchdown and 13.4 fantasy points, and he still had 8 targets in week 2. So, yeah, Trey Tucker's just 6% rostered. Really good matchup this week. Throw him in the flex. Is it risky? Sure, but we'll take the matchup here. Anybody else, Jack Besh, Donta Thornton, not worth starting at this point in time. But you got to like this matchup for the wide receiver position. It is definitely very, very good for both teams here in week 4. All right, to wrap up the afternoon slate of games, we're going to have the Ravens traveling to face the Chiefs in a very anticipated matchup here. As a reminder, I am recording this before Monday Night Football, so if you get any major injury for the Ravens or anything, I'll let you guys know in a pinned comment down below how I feel. But I think Zay Flowers is going to have a good game against the Lions. It's a great spot for him. I would fire him up really regardless of what happens in week 4 in a good competitive matchup. The Chiefs defense, not bad. We know this, but Zay Flowers has seen really good early volume here in the season. You got to keep rolling with him regardless of what happens in Monday Night Football, but my guess is he is a good Monday Night Football game. But it is worth noting, I mean, the Ravens have been spreading the football around to everybody except for Mark Andrews, essentially. But, you know, Rashad Bateman, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Walker, Tylan Wallace, like we've seen all kinds of involvement early in the season. Maybe somebody emerges as somebody that we feel like could be flexed, but I just can't do it with any of these other guys. They're spreading the football around way too much. We're not seeing like consistent volume to anybody other than Zay Flowers. If Monday Night Football really changes my thoughts on this, I'll have a pinned comment down below, but for me, more than likely, it's just going to be Zay Flowers as a start in week 4. Then we look to the Chiefs. Kind of confusing right now because, well, Xavier Worthy missed week 3. Don't know if he's going to play in week 4 at the time of recording this or not. Hollywood Brown has been the wide receiver 1, but hasn't really been showing up. And Tyquan Thornton has been showing up. But what does his role look like if Xavier Worthy is out there? It kind of dissipates his role. So I don't really know what to make of this Chiefs wide receiver room. I think they're all risky flexes. It's a good enough matchup. The Ravens haven't particularly been good against opposing wide receivers on the season thus far. This is going to be a matchup with points. All eyes on the Chiefs. Offense in this game, I would hope and I would assume. So, sure, maybe if Worthy doesn't play, Thornton is worth a flex. Maybe Hollywood Brown actually does something. Revenge game for him against a former team. You know, there's always that angle, I guess. But yeah, kind of too early in the week to really know without knowing the status of Xavier Worthy. But I do think it'll impact, you know, Thornton's potential volume and all that. And I don't know exactly what we're going to get out of this passing attack for the Chiefs anyways. It hasn't looked great. I mean, they just played the Giants and they could barely do anything throwing the football. So they're all risky flexes, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Next up, we have the Packers traveling to face the Cowboys for Sunday Night Football. Oh, man, what are we going to do with this Packers wide receiver room? Next to the Patriots, this is the most frustrating wide receiver room, it seems like, over the last few years in fantasy. The riskiest of flexes. Any of these guys could do something every single week, or they could do absolutely nothing. We know Jaden Reed's on IR. That should open up things for Romeo Doubs. He had just 2 targets and 2 catches against the Browns. Tough matchup this past week. Not a tough matchup this week against the Cowboys, who have given up the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers on this season. Dontavian Wicks has 2 catches this past week. Matthew Golden did have 4 catches for 52 receiving yards, which at least got you 10 fantasy points in PPR scoring formats. But come on, what are we going to do here? The matchup is there. Okay, you want to roll the dice with a Packers wide receiver? Go for it. But once again, these are the riskiest flexes you could possibly have. The most upside probably lies with Matthew Golden. But don't be surprised if it's a Romeo Doubs week or if Dontavian Wicks comes out of nowhere. Like, the matchup's there, but do I trust these guys? Am I starting lineup? No, I just don't. All right, George Pickens going to see an increase in volume because, well, CeeDee Lamb is set to miss a few weeks here, up to 4 weeks with an ankle injury. I was a little nervous about Pickens initially playing as a true wide receiver 1 here against a good Packers secondary. But we did see him play this past week as a true wide receiver 1, essentially the whole game. He caught a touchdown off of 9 targets, 5 catches. In an interesting fashion, George Pickens in 2 straight weeks has had 17.8 fantasy points, 9 targets, 5 catches, 68 receiving yards, 13.6 yards per catch, and a touchdown. So I don't know. Do what you want with that information, but this is a much tougher matchup. It's at home for the Cowboys. I was close to having him as like a low-end start. We're going to have to really see what Pickens does as the true wide receiver one for the Cowboys. I like Pickens a lot more with CeeDee Lamb on the field, and it is a tough matchup, but I'm going to leave him in the start category because I think that the Cowboys will need to throw the football. The volume will be there. We'll see how he performs here in week 4. All right, moving into Monday Night Football, we will have 2 Monday Night Football games here in week 4. Let's start with the Jets traveling to face the Dolphins. Garrett Wilson just remains a start for me. The Dolphins have improved in terms of their ranking against opposing wide receivers. Don't know if it's going to be Justin Fields at quarterback or Tyrod Taylor, but the volume is here for Garrett Wilson. There's nobody else on this team seeing any type of significant volume. Josh Reynolds has been hurt. Tyler Johnson has been the next man up. I mean, there's just really nobody on this team. Allen Lazard, 3 targets for Johnson and Lazard this past week. Tight end position is not doing much. I mean, Breece Hall out of the backfield hasn't been doing much as of late. I mean, had 4 catches this past week. You guys get the point. Garrett Wilson sees the volume. He is getting some of the highest overall volume at the wide receiver position next to guys like JSN and Zay Flowers here early in the season. So keep rolling with them. He's a solid start, really, regardless of who the quarterback is. I still think you can roll with him and expect a very safe floor here in week 4. When it comes to the Dolphins wide receivers, I have warmed up to these guys. I was pretty low on them early in the season, but hey, they're getting it done. They both have, Jalen Waddle has a touchdown in each of the last 2 games. Hill has 1 touchdown in each of the last 2 games, and they both have had double-digit fantasy days in each of the last 2 games. So I don't love this matchup, but it's going to be interesting to see Sauce Gardner on Tyreek Hill, how that impacts things. But that's really my only concern here. My concern is sometimes for the wide receiver one going up against the Jets secondary because of Sauce Gardner and the fact that quarterbacks don't throw a lot to wide receiver ones covered by Sauce Gardner. But outside of that, this Jets secondary is not good, and they're bottom 12 in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. So I think this is a really good spot for Jalen Waddle. I still think Hill is startable. They're just kind of low-end starts for me because this matchup makes it a little bit tricky. But I think Waddle is probably due for a pretty good week here, and he's been playing fine the past 2 weeks. I still think Hill, solid enough start, but we'll just leave it at that. It's tough to say, too, with the quarterback play and Tua and all that. But for the most part, you own the starting wide receivers in this matchup. I think you should feel pretty good here in week 4. All right, and to wrap up the week, we have the Bengals traveling to face the Broncos. Let's start with the Bengals side of things. This might be harsh, and it might be overreacting, but I've got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins just as flex options with Jake Browning at the quarterback position. And I'm not saying it's going to be this way every single week, right? But you can't feel good on the road going to Denver, playing one of the best defenses in the NFL with a good secondary. Pat Surtain on Jamar Chase, coming off of the week that Jake Browning and the Bengals, just had against the Vikings. You can't feel good here. You just absolutely can't. Jamar Chase, 8.9 fantasy points. Higgins, 2.5 fantasy points. They combined for 8 targets and 6 total catches. They're just flex options for me. That's all I can say this week. If it was a different matchup, I don't think I would be as, harsh here, but I don't like starting wide receiver ones against Pat Surtain. If Joe Burrow is starting, yeah, sure. I'd fire up Chase with confidence, whatever. You can't bench him, but man, these guys are just flex options for me here in week 4. And I think a lot of you guys would probably agree with that as well. You got to be a little bit nervous if you own Jamar Chase or T. Higgins as we approach week 4. Then when it comes to the Broncos side of things, you got to feel really, really good if you own Courtland Sutton right now. Had a monster week in week 3, 23.8 fantasy points, 8 targets, 6 catches, 118 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I know week 2, basically a goose egg, but outside of that, he's had 18.1 or more fantasy points, and this is a fantastic matchup against the Bengals at home. You got to feel good here. Sutton is a must-start player this week. Whoever's next in the pecking order, I don't know if Sean Payton's ever going to really let us know. Troy Franklin, did nothing this past week after having 24 fantasy points in week 2. Marvin Mims did nothing. Pat Bryant was on the field for 25% of snaps. So, yeah, it's basically Courtland Sutton, and that's the only player you can trust here. Maybe we get something due to the matchup out of a guy like Mims or Franklin, but you just can't trust it in your starting lineup. I know we're all crossing our fingers for a wide receiver 2 to emerge here in this Broncos offense, but I don't know when it's going to happen unless maybe you consider Adam Trotman at the tight end position to be that player. But for now, fire up Sutton. Love him this week. Great matchup at home for him here in week 4. There you guys have it. Every single matchup, every single player at the wide receiver position and who you should be starting or sitting here in week 4 of the fantasy season. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. Please drop me a comment. I'll answer as many as I can throughout the week if you guys need anything whatsoever moving into week 4 of the fantasy season. And while you're down there, it does me a huge favor if you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And this is all we do here all year long, free fantasy football content. So make sure you guys hit that subscribe button on the way out. And when the videos, playlists pop up on the screen, go check out all of our other week 4 fantasy football content. We have everything you could possibly need to absolutely dominate this week of the fantasy season. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.